Hello there, and welcome. Tonight, we will journey together across a gentle expanse of history and imagination. Settle in and get comfortable. Feel the weight of the day easing off your shoulders. Close your eyes if you like, and take a slow, deep breath. As you exhale, let the modern world drift quietly away. In this calm moment, we prepare to wander back in time, back to the age of caravans and ancient pathways, to the long, winding roads that once carried silken threads and sparkling spices between far-off lands. We are about to embark on a peaceful journey along the old Silk Road. This will not be a hurried trip, but a slow and soothing traverse across deserts, over mountains, and through valleys rich with history. There's no need to rush. The Silk Road stretches before us timelessly, waiting with patience and serenity. Imagine yourself standing at dawn in an ancient marketplace at the edge of the world. A soft glow of early sunlight warms the horizon. Around you, travelers are stirring, merchants loading their camels, monks adjusting their robes, nomads tending to their horses. The air is cool and still. You hear gentle voices murmuring in many languages, the quiet clink of pottery being packed, the soft snorts of camels eager for the road. In the distance, city gates are opening, and beyond them lies the promise of open sky and endless road. Take another deep breath and feel the sense of adventure and tranquility mingling in the air. We will walk at a leisurely pace, one soft step at a time. Our journey will carry us across high mountain passes and golden dunes, through bustling caravanserai courtyards and silent temple caves. We will meet the echoes of those who walked these roads before us, traders and pilgrims, sages and storytellers. Their footsteps have long faded, but their stories linger on the breeze. As we begin, allow yourself to relax completely. Feel each breath becoming slower and softer. With every exhale, release any lingering tension. The path we follow is safe and welcoming. It has been tended by generations of travelers, all leaving behind faint traces of kindness and camaraderie for those who come after. You are among friends on this trail of dreams. Now, let us step onto the Silk Road together. Under the pale blue morning sky, our journey awaits. Hear the faint jingle of caravan bells in the distance. Feel the earth firm beneath your feet, the same earth that countless others traversed in ages past. The world around us begins to stir to life, yet remains peaceful and calm. The Silk Road beckons, a ribbon of possibilities unfurling gently to the horizon. Come, let's follow this ribbon of silk threaded through the world. Our first steps are light and unburdened. The road stretches out ahead, quiet and enduring. Let us begin. Across mountains and deserts, the geography of the Silk Road. Beneath a crystal blue sky, a narrow wooden bridge clings to a rugged mountainside on an ancient trail. The weathered planks span a deep gorge, connecting steep rock faces dusted with snow. In the distance, jagged peaks of the Pamir Mountains stand silent and majestic. A faint path winds onward, inviting travelers to venture further into the highlands. The Silk Road's paths led through some of the most breathtaking and challenging landscapes on Earth. As we set out, imagine the terrain unfolding before us. Our trail begins in the east, near the great ancient capital of Chang'an, modern Xi'an, in China, and extends westward thousands of miles. This is not a single road, but a network of routes crossing mountains, deserts, steppes, and valleys. In the soft morning light, we feel the earth rise gently under our feet as we approach towering ranges that have witnessed travelers for millennia. High above, the Tian Shan and Pamir Mountains pierce the sky. These ranges, often called the roof of the world, formed formidable barriers between east and west. We ascend through mountain passes, where the air grows thin and crisp. Snow crunches softly underfoot. The path here is narrow and winding, etched into cliffs that drop away to misty depths below. Yet as daunting as these heights are, they provided a gateway between civilizations. Traders and pilgrims bravely led their caravans over passes more than 4,000 meters high, such as the Terek and Torugat passes in the Tian Shan, trusting in sure-footed yaks and camels to carry them safely. High up on these slopes, the silence is profound. Only the whisper of the wind and the distant bell on a lead camel break the stillness. Travelers would pause to marvel at alpine lakes reflecting the sky, or to rest at tiny villages perched in valleys, where green alpine meadows surprise the eye in a world of rock and ice. Descending from the heights, our path winds into the vast open steppes of Central Asia. Here, the land is a gently undulating sea of grass, stretching out under an enormous dome of sky. Imagine riding slowly through summer plains, shimmering with feathery grasses. Nomadic herders might wave a friendly greeting as their herds of woolly sheep and sturdy horses graze on the rich grassland. In spring, wildflowers sprinkle the steppe with color yellow tulips and purple iris nodding in the breeze. By day, the steppe feels boundless and free. By night, it becomes a quiet ocean of darkness spangled with countless stars. Many Silk Road routes threaded through these grasslands, where the horizon always promises another distant campfire, another cluster of yurts offering hospitality. The steppe nomads themselves became part of the Silk Road story, guiding caravans and sharing news across great distances. Before long, the green steppe gives way to the golden sands of deserts. One of the most notorious was the Taklamakan Desert in the Tarim Basin. Its name is said to mean, "Go in, and you won't come out," a testament to its deadly dunes. Yet we will traverse it safely along the well-worn caravan trails that skirt its edges. Picture a line of camels padding softly over rippling sand, their feet leaving gentle impressions that the wind soon erases. At midday, the heat shimmers in waves. The dunes appear almost fluid, shaped anew each day by the breeze. Travelers preferred to move in morning and evening when the air was cooler and the sands firmer. We can almost feel the temperature drop. As the sun sinks, daylight's glare softens to a golden glow. At dusk, the desert is peaceful and otherworldly. Distant dunes blush in the last light, and long shadows draw delicate patterns on the sand. The calls of caravan leaders echo in the still air as they urge animals toward the next oasis. Oases were the precious jewels of the Silk Road deserts. As we journey, imagine the relief of spotting green thickets of poplar trees and the glint of water on the horizon after days of sand and stone. One famous oasis is Dunhuang, on the edge of the Taklamakan. Approaching it from the east, travelers would first encounter the Crescent Lake, a small moon-shaped pond nestled among towering sand dunes. Even today, it lies miraculously in the desert, ringed by verdant reeds. How soothing the sight of water and shade must have been to weary souls and parched throats. In an oasis like this, we pause with our fellow travelers. You might hear the laughter of children playing under date palms, the splash of someone drawing water from a stone well, the sizzling of a simple meal being cooked over a fire. As night falls, the fragrance of blooming night flowers mixes with wood smoke. Rest comes easy under the spread of stars. with the comfort of water and greenery close by. From Dunhuang, two main routes once circled the Taklamakan's impassable heart, one to the north and one to the south. We choose the northern route, which threads between the desert and the snow-tipped Tian Shan, heavenly mountains. On our left, dunes and gravel plains stretch southward. On our right, purple mountain silhouettes line the horizon. The path is mostly flat and forgiving here, and we make steady progress. Occasionally, a dry riverbed cuts across our way, its banks marked by bleached driftwood, a reminder of rivers that flow only after rare rains in the distant hills. Dust devils dance playfully in the afternoon heat, whirling up little columns of sand that dissolve as quickly as they form. The sun is warm on our backs, but not punishing, as a light breeze from the mountains cools the air. In the far distance ahead, the outline of another mountain range grows. This is the Pamir and Karakoram range, where our route will converge with others coming from south of the desert. Here lies the crossroads region of Central Asia, sometimes called the Pamir Knot, where the greatest ranges of Asia, Pamir, Karakoram, Hindu Kush, seem to tangle together. Caravans had to navigate around these giants through high passes like the Karakoram Pass or the Wakjir Pass, depending on their destination. We can sense the change in altitude as our road climbs again into rocky highlands. Thin streams of glacial meltwater cross our path, offering cold, clear refreshment for us and our animals. In one sheltered valley, we find meadows bright with purple wildflowers, fed by snow runoff, a perfect spot to camp. The night air here is chilly, but our group gathers around a small fire. Overhead, the Milky Way arches from peak to peak, a celestial silk road of stars guiding us onward. Winding west and south of these peaks, Silk Road routes followed great rivers that offered lifelines through harsh terrain. We descend into the fertile valley of the Amu Darya, the Oxus River of ancient times. Its waters, born in the mountains, snake across plains and feed rich delta oases like Merv. More on Merv soon. Walking beside the wide, calm river, we enjoy the presence of cottonwood trees, the cheerful chorus of marsh birds. The river's flow is a gentle companion, reminding us that all along the Silk Road, it was often water rivers and streams that determined the easiest paths. Like liquid threads, rivers stitched together one oasis to the next. In some places, traders even built canals to extend that life-giving reach further into the desert, as in Merv's oasis, which was laced with canals and bridges. Finally, beyond the Oxus, the land opens into the broad Iranian plateau and further west toward the Mesopotamian plains and the Levant. Those western reaches are far beyond our journey tonight, but they too encompass diverse geography, rolling uplands, fertile valleys like the Tigris-Euphrates basin, and at last, the blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea, where goods from the Silk Road would sail on to Europe. Think of it, a piece of silk produced in eastern China might travel by camel and horse over 4,000 miles of land, then board a ship at a Levantine port like Antioch or Tyre to continue to Rome. As we pause and reflect on the panorama of geography we have traversed in our mind's eye, we realize how crucial the land itself was in shaping the Silk Road. The traders of old had to navigate around formidable deserts and over towering ranges, choosing routes that balanced safety and distance. Geography dictated the Silk Road's layout. Mountains funneled caravans through passes, deserts channeled them to oases, and great rivers both aided and occasionally barred their way. And yet, far from being just obstacles, These landscapes became cherished characters in the journey. Travelers found beauty in the shifting colors of the dunes at dusk, solace in the hush of mountain dawns, and joy in each verdant oasis that promised rest and friendship. We imagine ourselves now under a twilight sky, perhaps standing on a gentle rise where we can look back eastward at the outlines of mountains and the memory of desert sands. The road behind us disappears into shadow. The road ahead, westward, is still lit by the last rays of sun. A soft wind from the steppes rustles our clothing and carries the faint scent of distant grasslands. In this serene moment, one can understand why, despite all the hardships, people continue to traverse these paths century after century. The natural world along the Silk Road, in all its vastness, offered moments of profound tranquility and connection. Each mountain pass conquered rewarded the traveler with breathtaking vistas. Every desert crossing brought the miracle of an oasis and star-filled nights of contemplation. Our journey through geography draws to a close for now. We have crossed mountains and deserts in our minds, feeling the textures of each environment. Ahead lies not just more landscape, but the human story of how these routes were first charted and traveled. But before we move on, take a moment to breathe in the magic of the terrain around you. Hear the gentle lapping of a stream, the distant call of a nightbird in the oasis grove, the soft pad of a camel's footstep on sand. The Silk Road at night is peaceful, a long ribbon of history laid gently across the earth, illuminated by moonlight. We follow this ribbon onward, ready to learn how it all began and who first walked these sacred paths. Beginnings of the journey, early trade routes from China to Rome. In the quiet pre-dawn of history, long before the Silk Road had a name, there were only faint trails and the dreams of explorers. Imagine a time over 2,000 years ago, Chinese silk farmers tending mulberry groves near the Yellow River, Roman merchants bartering in the markets of the Mediterranean, and vast unknown lands lying between them. In this chapter, we will gently trace how those early, separate worlds began to weave together. We move slowly and calmly through time, watching the first threads of the Silk Road being spun by curious and courageous souls. Our story begins in ancient China, during the Han Dynasty. The capital city, Chang'an, bustled with life. Artisans wove fine silk cloth so light and shimmering that it was said to float on the breeze. At first, silk was a closely guarded secret of the Chinese, a treasure few outsiders had ever seen. But news of this marvelous fabric traveled along with the movement of people to the far west in the lands of Persia and, further still, in the Roman Empire. Rare pieces of silk began to appear, carried by intermediaries. These first glimmers of exchange hinted at great possibilities. Chinese emperors grew curious about the wider world beyond their frontiers, and in the 2nd century BCE, the Han court decided to reach out. A young ambassador named Zhang Qian set out from Chang'an around 138 BCE on a mission that would change history. We picture him riding out through the city gates with a small retinue, venturing into the unknown west. Though his journey was perilous, he was even captured by nomads for a time. Zhang Qian eventually made his way to Central Asia and back. He brought astonishing tales of lofty kingdoms to the west, of mighty horses in the Fergana Valley, of markets where strange and wonderful goods were traded. Most importantly, he returned with knowledge of possible allies and trade partners, like the Dayuan, Fergana, and the Parthian Empire in Persia. His travels opened the eyes of the Han rulers. They saw that a route to the west could be forged, promising both political alliances and new goods. And so the Silk Road's eastern end began to take shape. By 114 BCE, Han armies secured corridors west of the Great Wall, extending protection over trade routes leading out of China. The Chinese even extended the Great Wall further west into the Gobi Desert's fringes to guard these emerging trade paths. We can imagine workers quietly stacking bricks and rammed earth, fortifying lonely watchtowers against desert bandits. With the route made safer, caravans could venture out, carrying silk, lacquerware, and ceramics from China's heartland. To the far west, the Parthian Empire, in what is now Iran, was rising as a powerful kingdom. The Parthians became a vital bridge, connecting the eastern trade routes with those leading to the Mediterranean. They controlled the middle stretches of what would be the Silk Road, and they were shrewd middlemen. Parthian traders would obtain Chinese silks from intermediate markets in Central Asia and carry them further west, never revealing to their Roman buyers exactly where these precious goods came from. In return, they sent luxuries of the West eastward. Already, we see a pattern. Goods moved in stages, handled by many different peoples, rather than one person going the entire way. Each segment of the journey had its own traders who knew their terrain intimately. Now, let's glide our perspective to the Mediterranean world around the 1st century BCE and CE. The Roman Republic, and later Empire, was at its height, stretching from the sands of Egypt to the hills of Hispania. In the Roman forums and marketplaces, exotic products were always in demand. Stories circulated of a wondrous cloth from the East that was soft as a whisper and bright as moonlight Chinese silk. The Romans first encountered silk, perhaps via the Parthians or via Indian traders who ventured by sea to the Red Sea ports. However it arrived, silk caused a sensation. Wealthy Roman ladies draped themselves in translucent silk gowns, and Roman writers like Seneca and Pliny commented, sometimes scornfully, on this sheer luxury. Pliny the Elder noted with disapproval that Roman gold was flowing east to pay for the silks that high-born women craved. Despite occasional moralizing, the demand for silk in the West only grew. By the 1st century CE, Chinese silk was widely sought after in Rome, Egypt, and Greece. Picture a merchant ship docking at a port like Alexandria or Antioch, unloading small bundles of shimmering fabric alongside spices and gemstones. These silks would be whisked onto wagons or into the satchels of traders to be carried to Rome's elite clientele. On the return journey, the West needed valuable goods to offer in exchange. Horses were one such treasure. Central Asia was famed for its strong, heavenly horses, and the Chinese were eager to acquire these superior breeds for their cavalry. From the furs, Mediterranean and Middle East came woolen textiles, glassware, wine, precious metals like gold and silver. We can almost see a Parthian caravan loading up at a Levantine port, clay amphorae sloshing with sweet wine, finely blown glass cups from Roman craftsmen. The Chinese marveled at glass, considering it almost magical in its clarity. Rich dyes like Tyrian purple and red coral from the Mediterranean Sea, used as jewelry in India and China. All these would begin the long, segmented trek back east. The meeting of Han China and the Roman Empire, through intermediaries, was a momentous if gradual development. They were the two great bookends of the old world, and now, at least through trade, they were dimly aware of each other. There is an intriguing account from Chinese records about a visit in 166 CE by envoys who claimed to be from Da Qin, which the Chinese used to refer to the Roman Empire. These emissaries arrived by a sea route in southern China, bearing gifts like ivory and tortoise shell. Whether they were truly official Roman envoys is debated, but the story shows that by the 2nd century CE, the idea of direct contact was in the air. Back on the overland routes, let's travel quietly along with a caravan around the 1st century CE. We are in the company of Sogdian merchants, more about them later, who are experts in crossing from one small oasis to the next. They know every well and watering hole. We move from the lush Fergana Valley in today's Uzbekistan over to Bactria, northern Afghanistan, an area once conquered by Alexander the Great, centuries before, and still echoing with Hellenistic influences in its art and language. There, in the bustling market of Bactra Balk, goods from India, Persia, China, and beyond intermingle. Perhaps we pause at a spice vendor's stall. The warm aroma of cinnamon, imported from India or Sri Lanka, and pepper from the Malabar coast, fills the dry air, hinting at lands far south of here. Those spices might later travel northwest to grace Roman feasts. In another corner, a trader offers lapis lazuli, the deep blue stone from Afghan mines, highly prized by Egyptians and others for jewelry. Such a stone might travel west to be inlaid in a Roman brooch, or east to decorate a Chinese emperor's sword hilt. During these early centuries, the Silk Road was still a precarious venture. Security was sparse, and travelers faced threats from bandits and raiders amid long stretches of inhospitable terrain. We tread carefully, imagining the caravan, sometimes traveling in larger groups for safety. At night, guards keep watch at the camp's perimeter, and fires are kept low to avoid drawing attention. Yet not all encounters were hostile. Local nomadic tribes could just as well be allies or guides. Some might even be employed as escorts for difficult segments, trading their protection for a share of goods or payment in metal coins. It's calming to think that even in such early, uncertain times, cultural exchange began blossoming. For example, along with silk, another Chinese invention, paper, started to journey west. Though it wouldn't significantly impact the West until centuries later, by the 2nd-3rd centuries CE, Chinese paper was known in Central Asia. We might picture a curious scribe in a Parthian city like Ctesiphon, examining a sheet of this new writing material, marveling at how light and convenient it is compared to parchment. Similarly, ideas and art motifs quietly traversed these routes even in the early days. Chinese silk designs showed influences from Hellenistic art by the late Han period, such as grapevine patterns and winged angels, likely inspired by pieces that trickled in from the West. By the 3rd century CE, both the Han and Roman empires faced internal troubles and external pressures. The Han fell in 220 CE. Rome suffered crises in the 3rd century. Yet trade along the routes adapted rather than disappeared. Intermediate powers took up the slack. The Kushan Empire in Central Asia and northwest India, 1st, 3rd centuries CE, was one such important player. The Kushans straddled a key section of the route, encouraging commerce and the spread of religions like Buddhism, as we shall hear more of later. In the Middle East, the Parthians gave way to the Sasanian Empire, 224 CE onwards, which became a formidable and organized state that actively engaged in Silk Road trade. The Sasanians traded Persian silverwork, finely woven carpets, and perfumes to the east, and gladly accepted Chinese silks, which they sometimes even unraveled to reweave into Persian patterns. Chinese historians mention several embassies from the western regions during Sasanian times, likely bringing gifts of exotic products and requesting silk in return. Let's pause at a market town in Sogdiana around the 4th century, perhaps Samarkand or a smaller oasis like Kashgar on the western edge of the Taklamakan. This is a crossroads where multiple Asafanda routes intersect. We walk slowly through a morning bazaar. The air is cool and carries a medley of accents: Turkic, Persian, Indian, Chinese. There is a sense of convivium, living together among the traders. They share a language of commerce, even if their homelands are far apart. We see bolts of silk unfurled next to stacks of fragrant sandalwood logs from India and saddlebags of frankincense resin from Arabia. A Roman glass cup changes hands for a bundle of silk. The merchant holds it up, and sunlight fills it with a blue-green glow. Somewhere under a canopy, a few travelers sit sipping hot tea. Yes, Chinese tea was already being traded by this time to Central Asia, while others nibble on almonds and raisins that came from a valley nearby. The scene is busy, but not frantic. There's an ease to the negotiations, honed by generations of exchange. Even though neither Rome nor China has direct representatives here, their goods meet and mingle through the stewardship of these cosmopolitan traders. In these early centuries, the Silk Road was never a single continuous journey by one person from end to end. Instead, it was like a relay. One group would take goods to a midpoint, trade, or sell them. Then new traders would carry them further. Few, if any, traveled the whole way from Chang'an to Rome. One reason, besides danger, was simply practicality. The terrain and political boundaries were too varied. It made sense for specialists to handle sections. Yet goods did make it through multiple transfers. And along with them traveled stories and snippets of knowledge, a recipe for a new dish, a melody of a foreign song, news of a distant king's coronation, or a rumor of a new star seen in the heavens. These subtle exchanges set the stage for deeper connections to come. By the end of this chapter of history, let's say around the 5th century CE, the Silk Road was firmly established as a conduit of commerce. It had weathered the rise and fall of dynasties and was poised to see even more activity in the medieval era. But even at this early stage, one could find Chinese silk in Roman lands and Roman coins in Chinese border markets, proof of the astonishing distances goods had traversed. Silk Road trade had become significant enough that both ends felt its effects. Roman writers indeed lamented the drain of gold to the east for silks, while Chinese records mention the exotic products, like glass and horses, coming from the far west. As we conclude this gentle exploration of the Silk Road's beginnings, reflect on how quietly grand it was. There was no single moment when East met West with fanfare, rather. It was a slow, gradual knitting together of worlds by countless anonymous hands and feet. Camel by camel, mile by mile, the tapestry of intercontinental trade was woven over decades and centuries. The early travelers likely did not realize they were part of something called the Silk Road. That name was given much later, but they surely sensed the significance of their own journeys. Perhaps at night, a hand trader camped in the Fergana Valley looked up at the stars and felt a thrill, realizing he was hundreds of leagues from home, yet among people who valued the same goods and shared meals under the same sky. Now, in our own relaxed journey, we have watched those first silken threads being carried across Asia. Silk from China, gold and glass from Rome, spices and gems, and horses from lands in between, all started to move and connect distant empires. The Silk Road's early development was an act of faith and courage by traders and envoys who ventured beyond the horizon. We walk in their footsteps with gratitude, knowing the path ahead in our story will lead to even richer exchanges of goods and culture. But before we dive into what those goods were, let us take a slow breath and appreciate this remarkable beginning. East and West, once separate, now joined by a ribbon of road traced by determined dreamers over the face of the earth. Treasures of the caravan, goods woven through the world. As the Silk Road came alive with the footfalls of merchants and the bells of camels, it carried upon its back a cornucopia of goods. In this chapter, we will gently unpack the saddlebags and treasure chests of those ancient caravans. Let us stroll through a bustling caravanserai courtyard or a lively oasis market, taking our time to admire and touch the items that traveled countless miles. Each object has its own subtle story, connecting artisans and consumers from opposite ends of the world. The atmosphere around us is calm and inviting, as if every merchant has all the time in the world to show us their wares. First and foremost, of course, is silk. Silk gives the Silk Road its very name, and rightly so. We step over to a trader's stall where bolts of silk are unfurled, shimmering in hues of deep crimson, golden yellow, and soft jade green. Run your fingertips lightly over the fabric. It's cool, smooth, and almost weightless. A length of silk can be drawn through a ring with ease, so fine is its weave. In ancient China, silk was once reserved for royalty, but by Han times, it became a major export. Chinese households, from farmers to noblewomen, were involved in sericulture, raising silkworms on mulberry leaves and reeling their delicate filaments into thread. The process was painstaking, almost meditative, feeding the silkworms in silence, gently boiling cocoons, and spinning the raw silk. The result was a textile unlike any other in the world. When Western buyers first encountered Chinese silk, they were entranced. We recall how by the 1st century CE, Chinese silk was coveted in Rome, Egypt, and Greece. It was literally worth its weight in gold. Roman merchants might pay £1 of gold for £1 of silk in some cases. Silk had qualities beyond beauty. It was strong, yet light, warm in winter, and cool in summer. It could be dyed brilliantly or woven with intricate patterns, like the dragon and phoenix motifs favored by Chinese weavers, or later, pearled roundels, circular medallion designs, influenced by Persian art. As the caravans carried silk westward, middlemen often didn't reveal its origin. In Mediterranean lands, people concocted fanciful theories. Maybe silk grew on a special tree or was combed from exotic animals. Imagine the sense of mystery that a fine silk shawl evoked in a Roman villa. It was literally a piece of the unknown East. And for the Chinese, the gold or glass they received in return was equally exotic, something from lands only whispered about. Let's place the silk aside for now. The trader carefully folds it, knowing it will find a buyer by day's end, and move to another merchant's spread of goods. Here we see an array of spices and aromatics laid out in small clay bowls and leather pouches. Inhale gently. The air carries scents of cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and pepper. These spices mostly came from far beyond Central Asia, from India, Southeast Asia, or the Spice Islands, the Moluccas. They typically traveled up by sea to India or Persia, and then some continued overland north and west. Nevertheless, along Silk Road hubs, you could find these fragrant commodities. A pinch of pepper was like black gold, Romans loved pepper to season food, and it was a major import from India, some via the maritime route, but likely some made it overland to Iran, then to the Roman East. Cinnamon and cassia, from Sri Lanka or China, added exotic flavor and medicinal value. We watch as a trader offers a small sack of cinnamon bark to a wealthy Sogdian, who lifts the rolled brown quills to his nose, nodding appreciatively at the sweet warmth. In exchange, perhaps the Sogdian might trade Turkestan musk, a precious perfume ingredient from musk deer on the Tibetan plateau. Thus, scents of the tropical forests and alpine valleys commingled in these trade depots. Next, our eyes catch the glitter of jewels and precious stones. The Silk Road was a conduit, not only for man-made goods, but for nature's most dazzling creations. On a carpet, a merchant has displayed lapis lazuli stones, rich blue with tiny golden flecks. These were mined in Badakhshan, northeast Afghanistan, and have been treasured since pharaonic Egypt for their color. Lapis from these mines traveled to Egypt and Mesopotamia even earlier than our Silk Road times. Now, under the Kushans, and later, they continued to be exported both west to Rome, to adorn jewelry and be ground into paint, and east to China, where the blue stone symbolized the heavens. Next to the lapis, there are carnelian beads, orange-red chalcedony from the Indus Valley, turquoise, likely from Iran or Sinai, and perhaps a few rubies and sapphires which traders from Sri Lanka or Burma had funneled into the network. Though rarer on the overland route, sea routes carried many gems. Such precious stones did find their way across Asia. In fact, ancient Chinese tombs have unearthed Mediterranean coral and Egyptian faience beads, showing that even tiny luxury items could go the distance. Now we gently turn to some heavier goods. Along one wall of the caravanserai yard, several fine horses are tied, flicking their tails idly. These are not just any horses. They are the famed Fergana horses, known in Chinese lore as the heavenly horses. They are taller and stronger than the local Chinese breeds, and sweat, so it was said, a reddish foam that looked like blood, giving rise to legends. The Han dynasty craved these horses for their cavalry to fight nomadic Xiongnu tribes. Indeed, one of Zhang Qian's original motivations for exploring west was to seek an alliance and procure horses. Eventually, after some conflicts and negotiations, the Chinese obtained and bred Fergana horses, improving their stock. In trade, the Chinese would send silk to Fergana specifically to barter for horses. One early record notes thousands of rolls of silk exchanged for a few dozen of these prized animals. As we stand beside one now, we can appreciate its sturdy frame and calm, intelligent eyes. It munches contentedly on hay brought from a nearby field, oblivious to the geopolitics its ancestors influenced. Apart from horses, there were other notable animals and animal products traded. We won't dwell on the sorrowful aspect of the slave trade, which, unfortunately, was a part of Silk Road commerce. Human lives were also exchanged, like commodities in those harsh times, but we will focus on gentler goods. Camels themselves were sometimes sold. Bactrian camels, two-humped, from Central Asia, were invaluable in China's western regions, and conversely, smaller dromedaries, one-humped camels, could have moved up from Western Asia. Wool from highland sheep and furs from Siberian forests traveled to warmer climes. Chinese nobles delighted in fur trims and cloaks. The marketplace might have bundles of sheep's wool or camel hair ready to be made into textiles. There are also dried fruits and nuts in sacks, apricots, which were a Central Asian delight that eventually made it to China, where they were called Hun fruit at first, after northern tribes, pistachios and walnuts, which the Chinese came to know via the Silk Road, calling walnuts hu peaches. Let's move toward a quiet stall where delicate ceramics and glassware are laid out. Here is a collection of Chinese porcelain bowls. At this time, maybe early forms of porcelain or high-quality glazed stoneware, pale green celadon perhaps. Chinese ceramics were highly valued westward, though high porcelain came into its own, especially by Tang and Song times. Still, even in the earlier eras, fine Chinese pottery made its way out. In return, the East was fascinated by Western glass. We gently hold up a translucent Roman glass cup, sea green and blown into a fluted shape. The Chinese had glass, but Roman glass, clearer and in various colors, shaped into elegant vessels, was a novelty. In fact, one green glass goblet was found in a Han tomb, and chemical analysis showed it was Roman in origin. So imagine that, a Roman artisan's creation, ending up as a prized possession in a Chinese noble's burial, likely obtained through many intermediaries. As we admire the glass catching the sunlight, it's humbling to think of its long journey and how carefully it must have been wrapped in straw and cloth to survive. And what of metals? The Silk Road certainly saw the exchange of metals and coinage. The Chinese sent bronze-cast mirrors, famous for their polished reflective side and decorative back westward. Some have been found in Japan and Korea via Silk Road maritime routes, and some likely went to Central Asia. Meanwhile, the Chinese eagerly imported gold and silver. For example, Roman and Persian gold coins have been found in Southeast Asia and China, sometimes used as ornaments or chopped up for their material value. In one stall, a jeweler is melting bits of gold in a small crucible to gild a silver ornament. The gold could have been panned from a Himalayan river or could be melted Roman ore. We also see silver plates and vessels in Sasanian or Greco-Bactrian style. These might have gone east as diplomatic gifts or high-end trade items. A silver wine ewer adorned with grapevines or a finely wrought dagger could impress a Chinese dignitary in a way raw coins couldn't. Let's not forget the humbler but fundamental goods, textiles, other than silk. The Silk Road carried cotton and wool fabrics too. Cotton cloth from India, where cotton was grown and woven, made its way to China by the 1st centuries CE. In fact, the Chinese name for cotton was Western Regions cloth, initially highlighting its introduction via Silk Road. The idea of using cotton fiber was new to the Han Chinese, who mostly had silk, hemp, and a bit of wool. Eventually, they too would cultivate it. Meanwhile, woolen carpets and tapestries from Persia and Central Asia were beloved in the East. One can picture a rich merchant in a Chinese city laying out a lush pile carpet from Samarkand in his home, admiring its floral motifs and softness underfoot, a rare exotic luxury. Spreading out on another table are items that speak of knowledge transfer, books and scrolls. Early on, these would be bamboo or wooden strips, or parchment scrolls, and later, paper scrolls. They might contain Buddhist sutras from India, medical knowledge from Greece, translated into Syriac, then into Sanskrit, or astronomical tables from Persia. These intellectual goods are intangible, yet often traveled as physical objects, scrolls, manuscripts, and as ideas carried by scholars and monks. A merchant might not literally trade a scroll for profit, except in rare cases for expensive texts. But we know that along with goods came technologies and techniques. For example, the secret of silk production itself eventually leaked out to the West. A legend tells of Byzantine monks in the 6th century smuggling silkworm eggs in hollow canes from China to Constantinople. True or not, by mid-Byzantine times, silk was being produced in the Eastern Roman Empire, breaking the Chinese monopoly. That too was a transfer of goods in a broad sense, the relocation of an entire industry. Consider also paper, invented in China by the 2nd century BCE, traditionally credited to Kai Lun in 105 CE. Paper gradually spread west. A famous milestone occurred in 751 CE, after the Battle of Talas, between the Abbasid Caliphate and the Tang dynasty, where Chinese prisoners supposedly taught the Muslims how to make paper. Whether from that battle or trade earlier, paper making reached Samarkand and Baghdad by the 8th century. This revolutionized record keeping and literature in the Islamic world, which until then relied on papyrus or parchment. We can imagine bundles of coarse early paper being sold to scribes in Central Asia, or Chinese artisans traveling to show others how to pulverize mulberry bark and hemp to create sheets. Paper is a subtle good, but a world-changing one that the Silk Road conveyed. Now, stepping back to view this imaginary market as a whole, we sense how richly laden the Silk Road caravans were. Eastern travelers brought tea, porcelain, silks, paper, lacquerware. From India came spices, dyes like indigo, Buddhism scriptures, and cotton textiles. From the Middle East and Europe came gold, silver, glassware, woolens, wine, olive oil, and later new fruits like grapes and pomegranates to China. It was as though the Silk Road was a grand banquet table to which each culture brought its signature dish. We should also note that not all trade was about luxury. There were everyday commodities too: salt, grains, leather, tools, that moved regionally along the route. But over the long haul, it was usually high-value, low-bulk items that justified the months of travel. A sack of grain wouldn't travel 3,000 miles, but a sack of spices or a bundle of silk certainly would. That's why the Silk Road is famed for the rich goods. Silk, spices, and gems epitomize it. But as we've seen, it was truly a broad exchange of material culture. To make this scene even more serene and concrete, let's envision twilight in the caravanserai we've been browsing. The merchants are packing up their treasures for the night. They carefully roll the silk back into parcels, stopper the spice jars, and wrap the glass in straw. A cool breeze stirs the air, carrying with it a blend of all those exotic scents and perfume of the Silk Road. You sit by a small fountain in the courtyard, perhaps running your fingers through the water. Nearby, a pair of traders from different lands share a quiet meal. One breaks flatbread and offers it. The other sprinkles on a pinch of cinnamon and sugar, a little treat from far away. They eat in companionable silence as the stars blink into view overhead. Around them, bales of merchandise are stacked securely, and the animals rustle in, their sleep as if dreaming of the next day's trek. In this gentle gloaming, we appreciate that the goods of the Silk Road were more than objects of wealth. They were threads of connection. Each item passed through many hands, linking those people in an unseen chain. A Roman lady's silk dress connected her to the Chinese weaver. A Chinese scholar's glass cup connected him to the Roman glassblower. The trade goods were physical links binding continents. And they moved not with violent conquest, at least not most of the time, but with negotiation, hospitality, and trust among merchants. It was, in a sense, a very human kind of exchange, one that required cooperation and mutual fascination. So, as we leave the courtyard, let's take one more mental inventory of our favorite items. Perhaps you pocket a small blue lapis stone as a token, or a fragment of silk yarn, or maybe just a memory of the spice scent. These treasures of the caravan filled the world with color and flavor. In the chapters ahead, we will meet the people who traded them and the ideas they carried. For now, with the market closing, we feel content our senses, enriched by the diverse goods that have passed gently before us, from hand to hand, across thousands of miles. The night deepens, and the Silk Road's precious wares are at rest until dawn. Caravans of cultures, peoples, and civilizations along the way. As the Silk Road wound its way across continents, it was not just goods that traveled, but people. In this chapter, we will walk amidst a multitude of cultures that animated the Silk Road. Picture the road as a grand tapestry, each culture a vibrant thread contributing its unique color and pattern. We will meet, in a gentle procession, some of the notable peoples: the Chinese who launched the trade, the Central Asian merchants who became its lifeblood, the empires that rose and fell along its path, and the nomads who moved freely across its expanses. Each group has its own customs and faces, yet on the Silk Road they learn to communicate and cooperate, drawn together by the promise of exchange. Let us stroll through a caravan camp at dusk, where travelers from many lands gather around shared fires, telling stories in a dozen tongues. We begin at the eastern end with the Han Chinese. During the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, and later the Tang Dynasty, 618, 907 CE, Chinese. Civilization was a powerhouse of technology, art, and wealth. The Chinese contributed silk, porcelain, paper, and more to the Silk Road. But what about the people themselves? Chinese envoys, soldiers, and monks did venture out along the routes, and in reverse, foreigners ventured into China. The capital, Chang'an, became a truly cosmopolitan eastern terminus of the Silk Road. By the Tang era, Chang'an's population included a surprisingly diverse group of people from across Asia. The Chinese were generally hospitable to these outsiders. We can envision a Tang-era street where Chinese nobles in silk robes stroll past shops run by Persians or Sogdians, where the smell of Central Asian roast lamb mingles with Chinese noodles being pulled by a chef from Sichuan. The Chinese at home were fascinated by Western fashions. Some aristocratic women in Tang Chang'an even wore Persian-style robes and hats when that exotic trend took hold. As we sit in a quiet tea garden in Chang'an, we might overhear a Chinese poet conversing with a visiting Korean scholar or an Indian monk, each sharing knowledge. The Chinese provided the Silk Road with stability when their dynasties were strong and high demand for foreign luxuries. They also adapted and learned. For instance, the Chinese learned to play polo, a sport from Persia, and their musicians incorporated new instruments like the pipa lute, which actually has Central Asian origins. Through these interactions, Chinese culture itself became more rich and varied. Heading west from China into the Tarim Basin, today's Xinjiang region, we come to lands inhabited by ancient peoples like the Tocharians, Saka, Scythians, and others. These have mostly faded by late antiquity, but their cultural footprints remained in oases, cities like Khotan, Kuka, and Gaochang. These oases had their own kings and spoke languages of the Indo-European family, Tocharian or East Iranian, Sakha, and later adopted Buddhism zealously. They act as a gentle buffer zone of mixed cultures where Chinese influence met Indian and Persian. For example, Khotan was famous for its jade, a material highly prized by the Chinese. The Khotanese people traded jade east for silk, and also took up silk production themselves. They were Buddhists and translated sutras into their language. So we might imagine meeting Khotanese monks, offering us apricots and reciting verses on compassion beside a stupa under tall poplar trees. Continuing our journey, we enter the realm of the Sogdians. If one had to pick a single group to represent the human face of the Silk Road, the Sogdians are a prime contender. The Sogdians were an Iranian people from the region of Sogdiana, around Samarkand and Bukhara, in modern Uzbekistan, and they were renowned merchants. In the early centuries CE, and particularly during the 5th to 8th centuries, they virtually dominated the trade along the middle stretches of the Silk Road. Let's picture a Sogdian caravan leader named, say, Ashur. He is from Samarkand, but has perhaps never stayed home for long. His life is on the road. He speaks multiple languages: Sogdian, Persian, some Chinese, maybe Turkic dialects, acting as a cultural broker wherever he goes. We meet him around a campfire in a desert caravanserai. He has a friendly, weathered face and wears a warm wool coat over silk trousers, mixing pragmatism and display. Ashur and his compatriots carry letters from one city to another. Indeed, a trove of excavated Sogdian ancient letters was found near Dunhuang, revealing their intimate role in keeping far-flung communities in touch. They have diaspora communities in the Chinese capital and elsewhere. A Chinese document might even appoint a Sabo, a caravan leader, from Sogdian community to oversee fellow traders. The Sogdians bring not just goods, but also fun. They introduced lively music and dance to China. The Sogdian whirl dance was apparently quite the craze, and Sogdian musicians were depicted in Tang art, playing lutes and flutes at banquets. Around our campfire, Ashur might tell a humorous anecdote of a banquet in Chang'an, where he taught noble guests a Central Asian dance, causing much delighted laughter. Also at our camp, tending to the camels, we find a group of Bactrian or Tocharian handlers. These might be descendants of Greek settlers from Alexander's time mixed with local Central Asians. They offer insight into another facet of Silk Road cultures, those that were blends or now obscure, like the Tocharians who spoke a language distantly related to Celtic. They don't leave as much written record, but in the murals of desert caves, we see fair-haired, green-eyed Tocharian donors depicted alongside dark-haired, bronze-skinned Indian monks and Chinese ladies. The Silk Road was a place of ethnic mosaic. Heading further west, we step into the sphere of the Persian empires. Over time, these included the Parthians, Sasanians, and later, Islamic caliphates, Arabs, Persians, Turks. Each played a part. The Parthians, 247 BCE, 224 CE, as we mentioned, were crucial early facilitators. Though they often warred with Rome, they maintained trade. They'd convoy caravans to their western borders, where other intermediaries took over. A Parthian noble might have supervised trade cities like Merv or Nishapur, ensuring taxes were collected but also that caravans were safe in Persian domains. as it was profitable for them. The Sasanians, 224–651 CE, were even more active traders. They produced exquisite silver plates and textiles that went east. We might enter the court of King Khosrow II in a daydream. Envoys from the Tang bring silk, and in return receive Persian tapestries woven with gold threads. Sasanians also had a diplomatic interest. They reportedly tried to block direct contact between Rome and China so that they could remain middlemen. One Chinese account from the 3rd century speaks of a land, likely referring to Persia, that expertly passed on goods from Rome to China and vice versa, but kept the two empires ignorant of each other's roots. Cunning indeed. But, in our gentle narrative, we also recall how Persians lived in Chinese cities. For instance, Tang Chang'an had Bosi, Persian neighborhoods, with Zoroastrian fire temples. One such Zoroastrian temple in Chang'an was built and patronized by Persians, showing how they planted cultural roots far abroad. So the Persian people, whether pre-Islamic or later, were key players and great connectors. Then came the Arabs and Islamic peoples, transforming Western and Central Asia from the 7th century onward. After the rise of Islam, Muslim traders and scholars became prominent on the Silk Road. The Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates extended from the Middle East into parts of Central Asia. They controlled sections of the route and founded cities like Baghdad, which became a new terminus of sorts, a place where Silk Road goods arrived to be further distributed west. Muslim merchants, Arabs, Persians, later also Central Asian Turks who converted to Islam, traveled east to Chinese ports like Canton, Guangzhou, and to Dunhuang and beyond by land. It is recorded in Chinese history that an Arab caliphate, probably the Abbasids, sent emissaries to China. In Chang'an, one could find mosques by the 8th century. Indeed, tradition holds that the Emperor Gaozong of Tang approved the construction of the first Chinese mosque in Chang'an for visiting Muslims. How harmonious to imagine. While Chinese monks built temples in India, Arab merchants built a mosque in China, each respected by the local rulers. Among the Islamic peoples, one group stands out in Silk Road context. The Sogdians gradually merged into the broader Persian, Muslim sphere, or some into Turkic cultures. Speaking of Turks, by the 6th century, the Gökturks had formed a vast nomadic empire across the steppes, friendly to the Tang at times. These Turkic nomads, and later Uyghurs, Karakhanids, etc., took on roles as both raiders and protectors of the Silk Road. For instance, the Uyghur Khaganate, 8th–9th century, protected caravans and had their capital at Ordu Balik, not far from the routes. The Uyghurs adopted Manichaeism and Buddhism, and they themselves became avid traders. Some Uyghur princesses married Chinese emperors, carrying silk and tea as dowry, and bringing horses and jade as gifts. Over time, Turkic languages spread in Central Asia, replacing Iranian ones in many areas. But the trading continued. Just now, the merchant's tongue had shifted. A 9th century caravan could well be led by a Muslim Turk from Tashkent, who still honors some old Sogdian trade customs. We also cannot miss the Indians. India's role is sometimes in the background, but it was crucial. The northern Indian subcontinent, especially the northwest, like Gandhara, and North India under Gupta dynasty, etc., was the source of spices, textiles, and Buddhism. Indian merchants traveled up into Bactria and the Tarim Basin, bringing cotton cloth, aromatic sandalwood, herbs, and precious stones. Indian artisans influenced the art of Central Asia. For example, the Gandharan style, Greco-Buddhist art, from ancient northwest India, clearly left its mark on the Buddhist frescoes of the Silk Road. So around our campfire, let's invite an Indian trader, perhaps from Taxila. He is weary from crossing the high passes of the Hindu Kush with his pack goats, but he smiles as he serves us all a taste of jaggery, palm sugar, and dried mango he's carried. He listens as others speak of lands further east, and in turn, he shares news of the bustling ports on the Indian coast, where ships bring incense from Arabia and take silk onto Southeast Asia. And finally, integral to any Silk Road gathering are the steppe nomads broadly. These include Scythians, earlier centuries, Huns perhaps, various unnamed groups, and later the Mongols, who will have their own chapter. The nomads might not have left many written records, but they were often the ones ferrying goods, short distances, supplying animals, or being the wilderness mailmen. Historically, nomadic groups sometimes preyed on caravans, but they also traded with them. Many a caravan survived because they hired local nomads as guides across a tricky stretch of desert or to negotiate passage through tribal lands. Consider the Yuezhi in early times, once enemies of Han China, as barbarians. They migrated west and settled to found the Kushan Empire, which became a keystone of Silk Road trade and Buddhism's spread. Or the Xiongnu Confederation, adversaries of Han, they too traded border markets, exchanging horses and furs for Chinese grain and silk. Thus, even conflict-driven peoples ended up entwined in commerce. One touching story of cross-cultural friendship. In the 8th century, the Chinese poet Li Bai wrote of a Tajik, Central Asian friend in Chang'an, describing drinking wine together and dancing to barbarian music with delight. In another corner of history, the Tang general Gao Xianzhe, of Goguryeo Korean descent serving China, led multi-ethnic troops, Chinese, Sogdian, Turkic, all the way to meet Arab forces at Talas. Though the battle's outcome, Arabs won, had consequences like the diffusion of paper. On the ground level, these were people of different backgrounds interacting in complex ways. Imagine an evening in Samarkand around 750 CE. The city is at a cultural zenith under the early Abbasid influence after the Islamic conquest, but still heavily Sogdian in populace. In a courtyard lit by oil lamps, people gather after the day's trade. There's a Persian reciting verses of poetry, perhaps lines from the Shahnameh's early tales. A Chinese monk and a local Buddhist are comparing notes on a Sanskrit sutra. A Sogdian Zoroastrian tends a small fire in a brazier, quietly praying. The new Arab governor's official passes by, exchanging cordial nods with the crowd. A Turkic guard at the gate is humming a folk tune. Samarkand's blue-tiled domes glint under the moon. This isn't a fanciful utopia, but a reflection of how diverse peoples coexisted in Silk Road cities, albeit not without occasional friction, but often peacefully, united by trade and the need to accommodate one another. In this meditative encounter of cultures, we appreciate how the Silk Road was not dominated by any one civilization. Instead, it was a collaborative enterprise. Each culture contributed their specialties: Chinese silk and stability, Indian ideas and spices, Central Asian mediation and artistry, Persian fine goods and administrative savvy, Arab energy and scientific knowledge, nomadic mobility and connectivity. And all along, the Greeks, Romans, Byzantines on the far west and the Chinese on the far east maintained their great civilizations, scarcely meeting directly but indirectly benefiting and influencing each other through these intermediaries. The Silk Road thrived most during times when multiple strong states created a chain of relative safety across Eurasia. For instance, during the Pax Sinica of Han and Pax Romana, or later, the simultaneous golden eras of the Tang in China and the Abbasids in Baghdad, the route flourished under their patronage. The mosaic of peoples left enduring legacies. Many Central Asians today, like Tajiks, Uzbeks, etc., have cultural blends that trace back to Sogdian, Persian, Turkic, Chinese, and Arab influences, a living legacy of Silk Road mixing. In Western China, communities of Hui people, Chinese Muslims, trace lineage to Persian or Arab traders who settled over 1,000 years ago. The very DNA and languages of Eurasia bear the imprint of Silk Road migrations and marriages. Our gentle night of cultures ends, perhaps, with a simple song. Let's imagine around that Samarkand courtyard or our desert camp, someone begins to sing a lullaby known across the steppe. The words might shift language verse by verse. A line in Persian about a nightingale, a line in Chinese about the moon, a line in Turkic about a brave horseman, a line in Sogdian about a lover's promise. Each listener hears something familiar and something foreign, intertwined. The effect is soothing and unifying. People begin to drift to their resting places, rolled blankets, caravan cots, or simply under the stars, each secure that in this mixed company they are among friends. The fire crackles low. As we lie back and look at the starry sky, we might reflect on how remarkable it is that humans from so many lands found ways to work together. The Silk Road was a bridge not just of commerce, but of understanding between cultures. Travelers often had to rely on the kindness and honesty of those very foreigners their home upbringing might have warned them about. Over time, trust grew. As one Silk Road proverb from the region goes, "There are no strangers on the Silk Road, only friends you haven't met yet." Whether it was literally said or not, the spirit rings true. And so, lulled by that idea, we too feel safe and connected, cradled by the shared humanity of those countless souls who journeyed before us. Let us rest here, amid the caravan of cultures, before we explore how ideas and beliefs traveled along with material goods. The night is calm, and our heart is full, warmed by the fellowship of the Silk Road's diverse people. Oasis cities and shelters in the sand, key stops and caravanserais. Over the immense distances of the Silk Road, certain places emerged, like shining beads on a string, cities and caravanserais that offered respite, trade, and culture amid the vast wilds. In this chapter, we slow our pace to wander through a few of these key cities and caravan inns, experiencing their tranquil yet vibrant atmosphere. These locales were the heartbeat of the Silk Road, where weary caravans would find water for parched lips, walls for safety, and markets brimming with goods. Let us gently stroll through their gates and feel the welcome they extended to travelers from every horizon. We begin at the eastern end, Chang'an, the great capital of Han and Tang China. Chang'an, present-day Xi'an, was truly a terminus of the Silk Road. Imagine approaching Chang'an after a long journey from Central Asia. The land gradually becomes more populated. Green rice paddies and mulberry orchards line the roads, a sign of China's fertile heartland. Then the famous city walls come into sight, towering and thick, with guard towers at intervals. Under the Tang dynasty around the 8th century, Chang'an was likely the world's largest city. It had roughly 3 million people, including suburbs, by the 702nd, an astonishing metropolis for its time. We enter through one of its great gates, alongside a caravan of Sogdian merchants bringing in their last loads of silk and spices to deliver. The street is broad and orderly, lined with willow trees whose leaves rustle softly in the breeze. Despite Chang'an's size, everything seems well planned and peaceful. The city was divided into walled wards or districts, Fang, each a small neighborhood with its own gates closed at night. We walk by the Western Market of Chang'an, a famous district devoted to foreign goods and traders. Here we find bustling stalls, selling pepper from India, amber from the Baltics, it came via the steppe, and fine glassware, likely obtained from the Sasanians or beyond. There's a ferry, large caravanserai-like compound here too, where foreign merchants lodge and store their wares. Entering its courtyard, one hears a polyglot chatter, some Turkic languages, Persian, Arabic, and the local Chinese dialect of Shanxi. Despite the lively commerce, there's a feeling of ease. Deals are made with laughter and shaking of hands. The Tang authorities maintain order. Soldiers patrol politely, but mostly, people self-regulate through community. Chang'an had not only markets, but also many temples. Within a stone's throw, one might find a Buddhist monastery, a Zoroastrian fire altar for the Sogdian community, a Nestorian Christian church, the Nestorian Stele of 781, testifies to a vibrant Christian presence, and even a mosque. By the 9th century, 5 or 6 Zoroastrian and Manichaean temples were around the Western Market alone. One of Chang'an's enduring landmarks is the Big Wild Goose Pagoda, built to house Buddhist scriptures that the monk Xuanzang brought from India. We might climb its stairs in the late afternoon and gaze at the panorama of this cosmopolitan city, grateful for the safety and abundance it offers at journey's end. Now, moving westwards along the Silk Road's course, the next city that often captures the imagination is Samarkand. Samarkand lies in the fertile Zeravshan River valley of Central Asia. Often dubbed the Gem of the East, it is an ancient Sogdian city that by the 6th century was a center of Silk Road trade, and by the 14th century, under Timur, Tamerlane, it would shine even more. Let's set our temporal lens around the 10th-12th centuries for a tranquil view. Approaching Samarkand, one leaves behind the Kizilkum sands and suddenly encounters greenery, irrigated fields of cotton, and orchards of apricots and plums. The blue domes and minarets of Samarkand's skyline peep above its walls. Blue-glazed architecture peaked later, but let's imagine some early turquoise tiles, gleaming in sunlight. Samarkand was known to be populous, but in our sleepy journey, we might have arrived near sunset when the city quiets down. We pass through its gates, welcomed by an inscription, perhaps imaginary, saying, "May the weary here find rest and fortune." Inside, the streets are a pleasant labyrinth of mud brick houses and shaded courtyards. A canal of fresh water runs along the main road, feeding fountains and public baths. We wander into a caravanserai in Samarkand's commercial quarter. It's spacious, 2 stories around a large rectangular courtyard. Interior archways form an arcade around the courtyard, where pack animals are being unburdened. The Daya Hatin caravanserai in Merv was 2-story and had a big courtyard like this, and we can imagine Samarkand's ones were similar in concept. Our caravanserai has stables on the ground floor, storage rooms, and stairways to an upper floor, where travelers sleep in small chambers with wooden lattice windows looking out. The caretaker is kind. He offers us sherbet, a sweet, cool drink, flavored with local melon juice. Samarkand's melons were famous, and drying or candying them for caravan provisions was common. In the gentle dusk, we see traders from afar exchanging news. An Indian merchant tells of monsoon delays on the sea routes. A Persian recounts the latest scholarly debate in Baghdad. A Turk from the steppe marvels at Samarkand's cultivated gardens. We think of how centuries earlier, even Alexander the Great was enchanted by Sogdiana. And indeed, one of his wives, Roxana, was from near Samarkand. The city's name itself means stone fort in Sogdian, but to us in this moment it feels soft and welcoming. Heading further west, across the Karakum Desert's trails, we come to Merv, the queen of the world, in the 12th century. Oh, Merv. Today largely ruins, but once a splendid oasis city in what is now Turkmenistan. Merv was described as one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world in the 12th century, with over 500,000 residents. Let's arrive there around the year 1150 CE, at twilight. The approach to Merv is magical. After days in the Karakum Desert, suddenly canals appear, lined with reeds and mulberry bushes. The air grows moist and carries the fragrance of countless gardens and orchards. Merv's oasis is green and cultivated, a paradise in travelers' accounts. We cross a sturdy bridge into the city through one of 4 main gates in the 5-mile circuit of its walls. Inside, Merv bustles, but also somehow feels airy. Perhaps it's the many gardens and open spaces. The Murgab River's distributaries flow through, giving life to grapes, melons, and cotton fields. We see evidence of a culturally rich life. Libraries. Merv reportedly had 10 major libraries, one with 12,000 volumes, mosques and madrasas of Seljuk architecture. The Seljuks had made Merv their eastern capital, and markets outside the city gates for heavy industries like pottery and steel making. Merv was famous for its Merv cotton and crucible steel. At the heart is a large caravanserai. We step into its open courtyard beneath a clear sky. Here, one could meet scholars as well as traders. Indeed, Merv's scholarly fame drew intellectuals like Omar Khayyam, who worked at Merv's observatory, or Al-Khwarizmi earlier. But by night, the academic discussions quiet down, and we find travelers relaxing. The caravanserai's inner walls block out the noise of the markets. The only sound is the trickling of a small fountain in the center and the soft footfall of a camel being led to its pen. We find a bench under an archway and look up. The sky is turning deep blue. A single star twinkles. A kindly caravanserai keeper, perhaps a former trader who settled here, asks if we need anything. He can provide fodder for animals, secure storage rooms, even basic medical herbs if someone is unwell. Caravanserais were like community inns. They offered lodging for people, stabling for animals, and storage for goods. Some even had baths or small mosques inside. We observe as one traveler lights an oil lamp outside his room, casting a warm glow on the balcony. Another is scribbling a letter by that lamp, maybe to send home with a return caravan. Caravanserais supported commerce, facilitating rest and transactions. In cities like Merv or Samarkand, they often doubled as trade depots, where merchants could also conduct business. We recall reading that caravanserais in cities provided lodging for foreign merchants who needed a place to stay when doing business, serving as depots for merchandise and venues for transactions. So, likely, deals are quietly being struck, even here in the evening calm, albeit with trust and friendship rather than haggling shouts. Traveling west of Merv across Iran, one would hit caravanserais regularly. The Persian and later Islamic realms built many caravanserais a day's journey apart on major routes. There's something soothing about this network of inns. A traveller knew that after roughly 30-40 kilometers, there'd be another walled compound to sleep in. Each might have a similar layout, often a square or rectangular fort-like structure with a single large gate. The architecture varied. Some had elaborate brickwork and inscriptions praising a sultan's generosity for building it. In a remote one between cities, it might be very quiet. Let's imagine we stop by a smaller caravanserai on the old road between Nishapur and Ray Tehran. It's midnight. The stars are bright. Inside the courtyard, camels are chewing silently. Our footsteps echo slightly under the arched cloisters. We take a deep breath of the cool night air. It smells of dust and distant blossoms. In such a moment, a traveller perhaps felt deeply grateful for the existence of these safe havens. Continuing our westward thought journey, we eventually reach the fringes of the eastern Mediterranean. There, among others, stood Antioch, one of the great cities of Roman Syria and later Byzantine territory. Antioch, near modern Antakya, Turkey, could be considered a terminus where goods from the Silk Road reached the Mediterranean. By Roman times, Antioch was a wealthy metropolis, second only to Rome and Alexandria in the empire. We arrive maybe in the 2nd century CE. Here, the feel is different from the east, yet we notice silk in the marketplaces, likely from overland routes, coming via Parthia or Palmyra. Antioch is by the Orontes River, and in the evening light, we see the water reflecting the marble colonnades of the city's main street. Romans in togas stroll about debating politics, but also present are Greek merchants, Jewish traders, Nabateans from Petra, and possibly some Persian or Indian traders drawn by commerce. Historically, Palmyra, the desert trade city, had taken over some Silk Road trade, and Palmyrene caravans terminated at Antioch. So, within Antioch's caravanserais, or caravan yards, perhaps attached to merchant villas, exotic tongues might be heard. A Palmyrene guide might recount his travels to the Euphrates. He has seen silk come on camelback from beyond Parthia. In the harbour of Seleucia Pieria nearby, a ship is loading with silk bales to sail to Rome or to Alexandria. Antioch's role reminds us that Silk Road goods didn't only travel by land. At some nodes they switched to ships to complete their journey. We could also speak of Dunhuang, which we visited in geography as an oasis. It deserves mention as a key Silk Road stop at China's edge. Dunhuang had the famous Mogao caves, spiritual resting places covered in Buddhist art, arguably fueled by Silk Road patronage. Pilgrims and traders funded those cave temples in exchange for merit, and in turn, travelers enjoyed the peaceful aura of Dunhuang's monasteries, a spiritual form of rest alongside the physical rests. Between these cities were countless caravanserais on roads less known, whose names are lost to history, but whose contribution was immeasurable. They were often built by charitable patrons, kings, rich merchants, who understood that supporting travel and trade was good for the realm's prosperity and their soul. We heard how these inns not only fed and sheltered people, but also took care of animals, with stables and water troughs. Some even functioned almost like rudimentary banks or warehouses, allowing merchants to store goods short-term, perhaps while they scouted local markets or arranged caravans onward. At this point, let's step back to an eagle's view. The Silk Road chain of cities and caravanserais looks like a constellation at night. Each city is a bright star: Chang'an, Kashgar, Samarkand, Balkh, Merv, Baghdad, Damascus, Antioch, and in between, smaller lights of roadside inns twinkle. Together, they form the Milky Way of the Silk Road, guiding travelers from horizon to horizon. From above, one might see the glow moving as caravans trek and then cluster at these lights to rest. It's a reassuring image, a network of safe harbors in a great sea of land. Returning to ground level one last time, picture yourself awakening at dawn in one of these caravanserais. Say, in a remote one, in the Pamir foothills. Birdsong echoes in the courtyard as sunlight creeps over the walls. Fellow travelers prepare for departure calmly, saddling camels, folding blankets, eating some flatbread and yogurt for breakfast. There is a content and courteous mood. People slept well, knowing they were protected by strong walls. You pack your things and step out the gate. Outside is the wilderness again, but you feel rejuvenated. You know by evening there will be another haven ahead, perhaps behind ancient mud brick walls, or under the arches of a ruined temple repurposed as shelter. These stops along the Silk Road turned the arduous journey into a series of manageable days. They were the connective tissue of the Silk Road's body. Today, many are ruins or swallowed by modern cities, but we can still sense their ghosts. One can stand in the desert at Merv's crumbled caravanserai, or the Selim caravanserai, high in Anatolia, and almost hear the echoes of merchants bargaining, camels braying, and a small fountain splash. Now our step is light. As we leave this chapter, we carry the memory of cool water at an oasis, the camaraderie at a caravanserai's hearth, and the awe of storied cities. In the Silk Road's lullaby, these were the soothing refrains, the places of pause and exchange that gave travelers not only rest, but also the joy of meeting others. As we continue our journey onward into the exchange of ideas and faiths, we can be thankful for these sanctuaries that nurtured both body and spirit, allowing the Silk Road story to continue for centuries. With the sun now fully risen in our imagination, we set out again on the road, knowing that by nightfall, another friendly shelter will welcome us, just as warmly as the last. Pathfinders and pilgrims, merchants, monks, nomads, and more. As we travel further along the Silk Road in our imagination, let's turn our attention to the travelers themselves. In this chapter, we walk beside the individuals and groups who spent their lives on these trails. We will meet gentle merchants leading caravans of treasure, devout monks and pilgrims on spiritual quests, hardy nomads roaming freely, and other wanderers whose footsteps knit the world together. Each has their own story and purpose, yet all share the road in a kind of moving community. Picture the Silk Road as it might have appeared on any given day, a loose procession of travelers stretching across the horizon. Some ride camels or horses, others walk on foot. There is no single large convoy, but rather clusters that form and dissolve as paths converge or diverge. Now and then, groups camp together at night for safety and companionship, then part ways at dawn with warm farewells. In this fluid, slow-moving world, the characters of the Silk Road shine through. Let's greet a few of them kindly and listen to their tales. First, let us walk alongside a merchant perhaps the quintessential Silk Road figure. We'll call him Marco Polo, not the famous Venetian, but a fictitious middleman from a Central Asian town. He's a middle-aged Sogdian trader, with smile lines around his eyes. His caravan is modest, 5 camels and a few donkeys loaded with bales of silk, bags of spices, and some porcelain. As we match his pace, he recounts that he's been traversing these routes since youth, following in his father's and grandfather's trade. Merchants like him often did not travel the whole Silk Road, but rather bartered goods in stages with other merchants. So perhaps Marco Polo goes annually from Samarkand to Kashgar and back, trading along the way. He sells Persian silverware and Indian spices in Kashgar, picks up Chinese silk and tea to bring west. He knows every oasis on this stretch, each caravanserai keeper by name. Despite the challenges, you sense a contentment in him. "The road is my home," he says softly one evening by the fire. "In Samarkand, I have a wife and children, but part of my heart stays out here under the stars. Each journey, I meet old friends or discover something new, a new story, a new song, maybe a new spice or fabric. It's a hard life at times, but also a free one." We watch him skillfully haggle in the markets. It's never angry, more of a ritual dance of offers and counteroffers, often ending in a laugh and a handshake. Merchants like him built trust networks over years. They used credit notes, letters of recommendation, familial partnerships. Many carried silk, spices, porcelain, and precious metals, as we know. But merchants also traded in less glamorous items: medicinal herbs, dyes, walnuts, alum for dyeing, beads, and even recipes or techniques. Marco Polo proudly shows a recipe for a special steel blue dye he learned from a Kashmiri trader. He's carrying indigo and local plant extracts to attempt it back home. Now imagine a different figure, a slender Buddhist monk from China named Xuanzang, in honor of the historical one. Clad in a simple saffron robe, sandal shod, he travels not for profit, but for faith and knowledge. In our mind's journey, we see him leaving Chang'an at dawn, slipping past watchful border officials, for historically the Tang Emperor forbade his travel, but he went anyway. Why? He is driven by a spiritual quest to obtain original Buddhist scriptures from India. We join him crossing the Gobi Desert. He endures thirst and sandstorms, sustained by reciting sutras under his breath. Later, as he traverses the lofty Pamirs, local Buddhist communities help him, sheltering him in monasteries perched on cliffs. How calming it must have been after a grueling day on icy paths to sit in a quiet prayer hall, lit by butter lamps, chanting in unison with fellow monks. When Xuanzang reaches India, he spends years studying at Nalanda, a great monastic university, collecting hundreds of manuscripts. Then, he turns back east, like a bee returning laden with pollen, to bring the Dharma home. Picture him with pack horses, laden with scrolls, carefully wrapped to survive the journey. Many other monks made similar pilgrimages, Faxian earlier, Yijing later, all braving the road for the sake of learning and enlightenment. These monks often traveled with caravans for safety, and their presence must have been a blessing. They offered prayers, mediated disputes, and cared for the sick with knowledge of herbal medicine. The caravans in turn offered them logistics support, animals to carry their heavy tomes, or at least protection under armed escort. A gentle camaraderie grew. A merchant might privately pray for the monk's success, believing it earns merit, while the monk might quietly bless the merchant's venture. Not all pilgrims were Buddhist. Consider Nestorian Christian monks in the 7th century heading east. History tells of a 635 CE mission of Nestorian Christians reaching Chang'an, welcomed by the Tang Emperor. These monks, perhaps from Persia or Syria, carried sacred texts too, the Bible written in Syriac. In a caravan, one can imagine a Nestorian monk and a Buddhist monk sharing a camp. They may not understand each other's languages well, but by drawing symbols on the sand or offering each other food, they share a human connection. Religion traveled the Silk Road in many robes. Buddhism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Islam, later on, Manichaeism, all via pilgrims, missionaries, or traders who practiced them. Now, let's step to the side of the road where a group of nomadic herders is passing. These are steppe nomads, possibly of a Turkic tribe, moving their camp with the seasons. Unlike the merchants and monks who have destinations, the nomads are already home wherever they go. Their felt yurts, gurs, are portable houses rolled up on ox carts. Their wealth moves with them, flocks of sheep, herds of horses. We greet a nomad family, and they greet us back warmly, inviting us for fermented mare's milk, kumis, in a wooden bowl. They might not be traveling for trade, but they are integral to the Silk Road's ecosystem. They supply the horses, camels, and guides that caravans need. Many work as caravan guards or animal handlers. A young nomad man shows us his eagle perched on his arm. He's a hunter. His brother perhaps has joined our merchant friend's caravan as a scout for the next leg. Nomads had a reputation as fierce warriors, but here we see their hospitable side. After all, on the expansive steppe, hospitality is a sacred duty. Everyone might need help against the elements. We notice their children curiously inspecting the monks' strange scrolls or the merchants' trinkets. Cultural exchange, in its simplest form, a nomad child might get a silk ribbon from China to braid into her hair, while a caravan merchant might ride away with a finely worked leather bridle crafted by the nomads. Among the nomads are also the famed silk and jade smugglers of earlier times. Not every trade was legal or official. The Chinese tried to control silk export and jade import in early dynasties, but enterprising nomads and traders did a brisk contraband trade along remote routes. Perhaps we overhear at the campfire a hushed tale of how a certain merchant once sneaked silkworm eggs out to the west in his walking staff, echoing that legend about Byzantine monks. Or how Xiongnu nomads secretly traded Chinese silk to the Parthians for splendid horses despite imperial bans. Let's not forget the diplomats and explorers. Zhang Qian was one such pathfinder envoy, and later, during Mongol times, men like Marco Polo, the Venetian, or Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan traveler, journeyed across Eurasia, partly as explorers, partly as diplomats or in official caravan escorts. Their travelogues became famous, but they were just the noticeable, few among many less known ones. These adventurers often traveled in caravans too. A foreigner like Polo integrated into a Mongol caravan, or a Persian embassy eastward. Imagine meeting young Marco Polo near Kashgar. He's an inquisitive 1-year-old, having left Venice years ago, now marveling at Buddhist temples and trying to learn the languages. He pesters a caravan elder with questions about everything. What's that spice? How do they build yurts? Why do people bow to that statue? The older merchant laughs and answers as best he can. Later, by the fire, Marco might share tales of the far-off Mediterranean. In my city, water surrounds us, and stone palaces rise out of the lagoon. The others listen with wide eyes. Many will never go there, but through him they travel in their minds. In return, perhaps a Uyghur storyteller sings an epic for Marco, teaching him of King Gazar or ancient heroes of the steppe. Thus knowledge spreads person to person. We should also see the women of the Silk Road, often less recorded but present nonetheless. For example, the wives of merchants or nomads who traveled with them, or local women in oasis towns who sometimes ran businesses like inns or tea houses that catered to travelers. There's a historical anecdote of a Sogdian woman in Dunhuang who owned a tavern frequented by traders, a lively hub of gossip and news. Women also played the role of cultural transmitters. A princess, given in marriage from one region to another, common in diplomacy, would bring her customs along. Think of Princess Wencheng from China, marrying the Tibetan king in 7th century. She's said to have brought Chinese literature, musical instruments, and even the technique of making paper and silk to Tibet. Many on the Silk Road journeyed not by choice but by fate. We speak of slaves or captives. Though not a pleasant topic, their experience too shaped interactions. A captured soldier from a far land might end up a servant in another, inadvertently carrying his culture's songs or culinary preferences with him. Or a skilled artisan, taken by conquerors like the Mongols, often relocated artisans within their empire, might build foreign-style bridges or craft new kinds of ceramics in his place of exile, blending techniques from back home. Even these difficult journeys contributed threads to the cultural tapestry of the Silk Road. The road also sometimes hosted medical healers, fortune tellers, itinerant entertainers, musicians, acrobats, all moving where opportunity or inspiration led. One can imagine a small troupe of musicians traveling from oasis to oasis, performing for coins or hospitality. They might have a mixed repertoire. Maybe they learned a Persian love ballad in Bukhara, a Buddhist hymn in Kucha, and a folk dance tune from a Kazakh herder, and they play all three depending on the audience. Hearing new music, some locals pick up the tune, hum it later, and in that humming, the melody travels further beyond the original performers. The pace of travel is slow. Typically, a caravan might cover 20-30 kilometers a day. This slowness is actually a blessing for cultural exchange. It gives people time to share stories, teach each other languages bit by bit, pick up each other's mannerisms gently and unconsciously. A merchant might start using a particular loanword from Sogdian for tax or market without even realizing it, because everyone in a certain region uses that word. Over years, such words make it into new languages. Indeed, we find linguistic traces. Chinese records kept some transcription of foreign words, and many languages in Central Asia borrowed words from one another for new concepts. For example, the word for a certain spice, fruit, or cloth often traveled with the object. The travelers themselves were like walking dictionaries, absorbing and dispensing vocabulary at each stop. Now, as twilight deepens on our day with these travelers, envision one large caravan camp gathering. Perhaps it's a rare occasion where many groups converge, say at Kashgar during the summer market festival. There might be an impromptu feast. Nomads slaughter a sheep for a communal stew. Merchants contribute some wine or tea. Monks offer blessings for the meal. Sitting in a big circle around a bonfire, they share not only food but also themselves. A Persian merchant recites verses of Hafiz, or earlier, maybe of Zarathustra's hymns, in a melodious tone. A Chinese trader, far from home, sings a nostalgic song about the moon over his village. A Turkish nomad drums a rhythm on a leather skin, A Sogdian claps along and starts a lively dance, coaxing some others to join. Soon, a ring of dancers forms, laughing as they attempt each other's dance moves. In this firelit human tapestry, one senses no border of empire or creed, just people on a journey, finding joy and solace in each other's company. Eventually, they retire to their tents and wagons, bidding each other good night in multiple tongues. Perhaps, good night, Shab Bakhair, Wanan, Tuningas Hayr Lebolson, all meaning the same heartfelt wish for rest. There is a calm over the camp. Camels snort softly in the dark. A monk's prayer wheel still faintly chimes as he murmurs evening mantras. The stars above twinkle, as if listening to the tales just told. As we drift to sleep in our imagining, we realize these pathfinders and pilgrims were the ones who truly wove the Silk Road's threads. Objects moved, yes, but it was people who carried them, who bartered, taught, learned, and befriended. Each merchant's handshake, each monk's chant, each guide's warning shout at a river crossing, all these human moments bound disparate worlds into one. We carry this warmth of human connection into our next dreams, ready next to explore not just goods and people, but the ideas that rode with them on the backs of camels and in the hearts of bags. Pilgrims. For now, enveloped by the kindness and bravery of these travelers, we too feel a bit like a Silk Road wayfarer, part of a long continuum of souls walking under the same sky, guided by curiosity and fellowship. Wisdom and wonders on the wind, the exchange of ideas and beliefs. All along our journey so far, something invisible yet powerful has been accompanying the trade caravans and travelers, the exchange of ideas, knowledge, beliefs, and culture. In this chapter, we turn our attention to these more subtle treasures. They may weigh nothing and occupy no space in a camel's pannier, but they are carried in minds and hearts, and their impact is profound and enduring. We will move calmly through how religions spread along the Silk Road, how technology and inventions found new homes, and how even music, art, and stories traveled, transforming the societies that received them. Imagine the Silk Road not just as a highway of commerce, but as a great whispering gallery where civilizations conversed across thousands of miles. Let's begin in a quiet cave shrine near Dunhuang, at the edge of the Gobi. It's dawn, and a sliver of sunlight illuminates ancient murals on the cave walls, Buddhist paintings of serene bodhisattvas, donors, and flying apsara spirits. How did Buddhism, born in India, take root here on China's frontier? It arrived on the backs of those very merchants and monks we spoke of. By the 2nd century CE, Buddhist missionaries and traders traveling from India and Central Asia were introducing Buddhism into the Tarim Basin. They established small temples in oasis cities like Khotan, Kuka, and Gaochang. Over time, these grew into major monastic centers. Dunhuang's Mogao Caves, whose artwork spans from the 4th to 14th centuries, are a testament to the Silk Road's role in transmitting Buddhism. The paintings show stylistic influences from many lands, Indian Gupta art in early ones, Persian and even Greek, touches in some the use of halo imagery, cherubic figures, etc., reminiscent of Western styles. Here, we tangibly see syncretism, local Chinese artistic conventions, blending with foreign ones to depict the life of the Buddha and various sutras. We also recall that an enormous trove of texts was found at Dunhuang, the Pong, famous library cave, including scriptures in Chinese, Sanskrit, Sogdian, Tibetan, and even documents like letters and contracts. a real archive of multicultural ideas. One of those texts is the Diamond Sutra in Chinese, the world's oldest printed book, 868 CE. Printing itself was a Chinese innovation that eventually made its way west. But let's go back to Buddhism's journey. Traveling monks like our imaginary Xuanzang or the real Faxian, as well as Central Asian merchants who converted, helped spread Buddhist philosophy, ethics, and cosmology along the Silk Road. Many Central Asians adopted Buddhism. For instance, the Kushan Empire, 1 Saint 3 RDC, actively supported Buddhism, and their king Kanishka is said to have convened a great Buddhist council. As Buddhism moved into China, it encountered Confucian and Taoist ideas, and Chinese Buddhism evolved into distinct schools like Chan, Zen. But the initial spark, the very Dharma, came via Silk Road contact. By the Metic 7th century, we see that Buddhism had become a major faith in China, thanks in large part to the Silk Road connectivity. Now consider Christianity. In the West, around the 1 Cent 3 RD centuries CE, Christianity arose in the Roman Empire, but it also spread eastward. A form of Christianity called Nestorian Christianity, the Church of the East, became active in Persia and beyond. By the 7th century, Nestorian missionaries traveled into Central Asia and China. They established churches in places like Merv, Samarkand, and Chang'an. The Nestorian Stele of Xi'an, 781 CE, written in Chinese and Syriac, proudly records 150 years of Christian presence in China. It mentions how the luminous religion came from Darkin, the Roman lands, Syria, and was welcomed by Tang emperors. So along the Silk Road, one might find a Christian monastery discreetly operating in a largely Buddhist or Zoroastrian town. And indeed, archaeology has found traces, crosses, Syrian inscriptions, even Christian gravestones in Kashgar and Kyrgyzstan. This shows that ideas of the West, monotheism, Christian theology, also traveled east. The Nestorians brought with them not only religious teachings, but also knowledge of medicine and astronomy from the Middle East, which Tang Chinese sometimes consulted. Next, Islam. After emerging in the 7th century in Arabia, Islam spread swiftly and reached the Silk Road routes. By mid-8th century, the Abbasid Caliphate controlled the western half of the Silk Road, up to Transoxiana, Central Asia. Trade became a conduit for Islam's spread, as much as conquest. Muslim merchants, Arab, Persian, later Central Asian Turk, traveled far east to Chinese ports and overland to Chinese cities. Many settled in places like Kashgar, Turpan, Dunhuang, or coastal Guangzhou, forming Muslim communities. The Tang records mention the Dashi, Arabs, and note their religion. By the time of the Yuan, Mongol era, Muslims held important offices in China and had built mosques in many cities. Islam gradually became the dominant faith in many Central Asian towns, especially after the conversion of rulers like the Karakhanids in the 10th century. It often spread peacefully through trade. Local rulers saw the advantage of aligning with the big Muslim trade network, and Sufi missionaries, Islamic mystics, followed in trader caravans, preaching gently. Over centuries, Buddhism and Nestorian Christianity in Central Asia gave way to Islam, illustrating how the Silk Road was also a road of religious succession. The exchange of theological ideas was robust. Debates and dialogues occurred when these faiths intersected at cosmopolitan courts, like the Tang court, where Buddhists, Zoroastrians, Christians, Taoists might debate. Beyond religion, consider the spread of technology and scientific knowledge. We have noted some specific items like paper and gunpowder. Paper's technique went west after the Battle of Talas, 751, where captured Chinese artisans reputedly taught it to the Arabs. Soon, paper mills appeared in Samarkand and Baghdad. The Islamic world's scholarship blossomed in part due to access to paper, cheaper than parchment, which led to a golden age of libraries and science. Gunpowder, invented in China in the Tang era, gradually diffused west, probably via the Mongols in the 13th century. By the mid-14th century, Islamic and European worlds got gunpowder knowledge, a transfer which would forever change warfare. The compass, for navigation, and printing are two other Chinese innovations that eventually reached Europe, though printing in the West came through independent invention later. Still, some argue that knowledge of block printing might have seeped west. The Silk Road also transmitted medical knowledge. For instance, the herbal medicine practices of China became known in Central Asia, while Greco-Arabic medicine, from Hippocrates, Galen, later Avicenna's canon, made its way to Chinese court physicians. In the Tang era, Chinese emperors invited foreign doctors. Conversely, Chinese medical texts were translated into Arabic. One example is that rhubarb, a Chinese medicinal plant, became an export west for its laxative properties. Medieval Europe imported a lot of Chinese rhubarb via the Silk Road. Also, the concept of smallpox inoculation, practiced in China by blowing powdered scabs into nostrils, might have traveled to Western regions, eventually influencing Edward Jenner's work centuries later. Another intangible, language and writing systems. The Silk Road was a corridor of linguistic diversity. Through trade, Creole languages or pidgins emerged for communication. Sogdian language, being common among traders, influenced others and left loanwords in Chinese. For example, words for grape, lion, and in Old Turkic. The Arabic script was adapted to write Persian, then Turkic languages, as Islam spread. A cultural idea, the script, traveling with the faith. Earlier, the Aramaic script, in the form of Syriac, had been used by Nestorians and influenced the development of Uyghur script, which later gave rise to Mongolian script. So when you see Mongolian vertical writing, its lineage traces back through the Silk Road to a Semitic script of the Near East, a graphic example of idea migration. Let's not forget art and aesthetics. Art motifs hopped along with trade goods. For example, Chinese silks of the Tang period began depicting pearled roundels enclosing animals, a motif borrowed from Sasanian Persian art. Meanwhile, Central Asian artists adopted the Chinese cloud patterns or phoenixes in their murals. The blend of Hellenistic Greek style with Indian Buddhist subject in the Gandhara region produced an artistic style that was carried by monks along the Silk Road. You can see its echo in the Buddha statues of Bamiyan, Afghanistan, and some early Chinese Buddhist sculpture, the realistic drapery of robes, the wavy hair, very un-Chinese, originally more Greek. This melding was purely through observation and teaching, artists learning from foreign artists. Techniques in art also traveled, like glassmaking, which likely spread from the Mediterranean to China. China produced very little glass originally, and when they did, it seems they imitated Western methods. Food ideas, too, traveled. We taste that legacy even today. The dumpling is believed by some to have come from the interactions of Chinese and Central Asian cuisine, perhaps the mantou, steamed bun, or filled dumplings like manti spread east and west. Noodles possibly moved from China westward, or vice versa. Debates continue, but certainly by the time of Marco Polo, noodles were common in China, and soon after known in Italy. Tea traveled from China. By the 19th century it was global, but long before, Central Asians and Persians had learned to enjoy tea, often adding their own twist, like spices or milk. Conversely, grape wine was introduced to China through Silk Road. Grapes were not native to the Chinese interior. Zhang Qian brought grape seeds back, and the Han started vineyards. The word for grape in Chinese, putao, likely comes from a Western language. Spices, pepper, cinnamon, saffron, changed eating habits far from their lands of origin. Imagine a Tang noble sprinkling pepper on food, a habit learned via the Persians, or an Arab chef using Chinese citrus fruits. Lemons, oranges came via India, China. One fascinating example of intellectual exchange is how much of Greek knowledge came back to Europe through the Silk Road chain. After the fall of Rome, Europe lost a lot of ancient science, but the Abbasid caliphs had Greek works translated into Arabic and combined them with Persian and Indian knowledge. Through both Islamic Spain and likely via the Silk Road to the Crusader states, etc. This knowledge, for example, Aristotle's philosophy, Ptolemy's geography, Euclid's geometry, re-entered Europe in medieval times. The Silk Road's part in that was indirect but important. For example, the concept of zero and the decimal system from India, transmitted through the Islamic world to Europe, often called Arabic numerals in Europe. But they came from India. The Arabs called them Hinzi, Indian numbers. Algebra was developed by Al-Khwarizmi in Central Asia, whose very name gave algorithm, and such treatises traveled. The Chinese seismograph, astronomical observations, and eclipse predictions were shared with Islamic astronomers when the Mongols established an observatory in Maragheh, Persia, staffed by Chinese astronomers, among others. Even games and leisure activities spread. The game of chess originated likely in India and moved west to Persia, hence words like rook, from Persian ruk, and east to China, where xiangqi is an analogue. Polo was a Persian sport, adopted eagerly by Tang China. Their art often shows polo players on horseback. Playing cards may have a Chinese origin, as paper, money idea, or divination lots, and moved west to become the card decks we know. Finally, not all ideas were beneficial. Diseases traveled too. As the Wikipedia excerpt hints at plague, the Black Death of the 14th century moved along trade routes from Asia to Europe, devastating populations. It's a somber reminder that connectivity can spread sorrow as well as wisdom. But focusing on our meditative narrative, even that dark cloud had silver linings in knowledge. After plagues, survivors often made changes in society and medicine that shaped history. For instance, labor conditions improved in Europe due to labor shortage. Some say the Renaissance was partly a societal response to upheaval. In a tranquil twilight thought, consider a Silk Road traveler around year 800 CE. He sits by his campfire, writing in his journal. Imagine a mix of papers collected from different places. He notes, "Today I learned a new prayer from a monk, tasted a fruit from a far land, and heard a story about a hero I did not know. The world is wider than I ever imagined, yet under the stars, It feels like one great family. This fictional diarist captures the essence. Ideas expanded minds on the Silk Road. People realized there were other ways to understand the divine, other systems for counting stars, other stories explaining the constellations. And so, as we complete our gentle exploration of intellectual and spiritual exchange, we appreciate that the Silk Road's greatest legacy might not be the silk or gold at all, but this rich cross-fertilization of culture and knowledge. It made our world more connected and our collective wisdom greater. The whispers carried on the desert winds, verses, formulas, recipes, and prayers still echo in our lives today. We carry a part of that heritage whenever we sip tea with a dash of spice, thanks to the Silk Road, use algebra, al-Jabr, or contemplate the teachings of a religion that came from far away. In the calm of the evening, knowing this interweaving of ideas makes us feel deeply connected to all humanity. Let's breathe in that feeling of unity and wonder as we prepare to see our Silk Road journey through one more great chapter of change, the rise of the Mongol Empire, which would unite the whole route under one rule, however briefly, and then the road's eventual fade into history with the coming of new sea paths. For now, let the lanterns of knowledge we've lit guide us gently onward. The Empire of the Steppes, Pax Mongolica, and the journey of Marco Polo. In the vast grasslands of Mongolia, under a boundless blue sky, a young boy named Temujin once learned to ride and hunt. Little could anyone guess that this boy would become Genghis Khan, and that his descendants would forge the largest contiguous land empire in history. In this chapter, we enter the era of the Mongol Empire and experience the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, which, for a few shining decades in the 13th century, made the Silk Road as safe and unified as it ever would be. We will move calmly through this epoch of change, observing how Mongol rule influenced Silk Road trade and travel, and will accompany one famous traveler, Marco Polo, on his peaceful wanderings under Mongol auspices. It's around the year 1220. Close your eyes and imagine standing on a gentle hill overlooking the steppe. A cool breeze whispers through feather grass. In the distance, you see an ocean of horsemen, standard bearers fluttering, moving like a single organism. This is the Mongol army on the march, formidable, disciplined, and unstoppable. City after Silk Road, city falls or surrenders to them. Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv. Each experiences the thunder of hooves and the stern demand to submit. There is destruction in some places. Tragically, Merv was destroyed in 1221, ending its golden age. But after the conquest, a curious thing happens. The Mongols, once seen purely as warriors, become patrons of trade and culture across their empire. Genghis Khan and his successors realized that controlling the Silk Road could enrich their empire. They valued skilled artisans and merchants. Under Mongol rule, the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia, the Silk Road enjoyed an unusual period of internal peace. Because all these regions were now under related Mongol rulers, the long journey encountered far fewer bandit raids or hostile border checkpoints. This is the Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace. Travel from China to Persia became easier and faster than it had been in centuries. The Mongols established an extraordinary system of relay stations called the Yam. Every 20 to 30 miles throughout the empire, there were way stations where official travelers could rest, get fresh horses, and find supplies. Picture a network of these yam posts like pearls on a string, from Karakoram, the Mongol capital, to Khanbalik, Beijing, to Tabriz to Kiev. At each station, a yurt, or house awaits with warm food and mare's milk. A messenger arrives, leaps off his exhausted horse and onto a fresh one, and gallops off within minutes. It's said Mongol couriers could cover up to 200 to 250 miles a day by such relays. For traders, the yam system meant road security and communication. They might not swap horses like official envoys, but they benefited from the infrastructure and safety it provided. If a caravan was attacked by robbers, local Mongol patrols dealt harshly with the bandits. Mongols were ruthless in enforcing law across their routes. Under this protected regime, long-distance trade boomed. Caravans grew larger and bolder, carrying porcelains, spices, precious gems, metals, medicines, and textiles in huge quantities. The Mongol Khans themselves encouraged commerce. They issued special paisa tablets to favored merchants, granting them immunity from local tolls and requisition. Some merchants became rich and influential at the Khan's courts. One famous group was the Ortoi, merchants who partnered with Mongol nobles to conduct trade missions with the nobles' capital. Now into this thriving 13th century Silk Road steps our traveller Marco Polo. We catch up with him around 1275 as he and his father and uncle approach the court of Kublai Khan in Khanbalik, Beijing. Marco is awed by what he sees: towering cities, a cosmopolitan court filled with Persians, Turks, Chinese, and others, and an efficient empire that prints paper, money, uses coal for fuel, something he hadn't seen in Europe, and has an extensive canal system. He spends around 17 years in Mongol China, traveling as an official of Kublai Khan to various parts of the realm. Let's join Marco on one of his journeys, say, from Khanbalik to the southwestern province of Yunnan. He travels with a Mongol escort and other officials. They ride out along a clear road, crossing the Yellow River via an ingenious pontoon bridge engineered by Chinese artisans. Each night, they lodge at orderly inns or relay posts, the Yam, where they find accommodations, and their travel permits, paisa, ensure they are well treated. On his way, Marco notes details meticulously: the species of trees and crops, the customs of local people, like he describes the custom of burning dead bodies and collecting ashes among some groups, or the way salt is made from salt lakes. He is essentially playing the role of a cultural reporter. Through him, Europeans would later learn about things like asbestos, which he calls salamander wool, the postal system, and perhaps most famously, if somewhat erroneously, some thought he introduced pasta to Italy, though that's debated. What he certainly did was open European imagination to a grand, wealthy, and advanced Asia. He describes in his calm narrative style how silk is everywhere. Everyone, male or female, wears garments of silk. He exaggerates about some cities, how the empire is so safe that a person may travel alone all over the country without injury or fear, an effect of Pax Mongolica, noted by other contemporaries too. Marco's travels took him also along sea routes on the way back, but during his inland journeys, he must have marveled at the Silk Road in full swing. Caravans with Mongol banners, friars from Europe coming to debate with Buddhists and Muslims at Kublai's court, Central Asian weavers in workshops in northern China, the Khan imported artisans freely. The Mongol era is courted when we have East meeting West perhaps more directly than ever before. For instance, in the Yuan court, Arab and Persian astronomers worked alongside Chinese ones to refine calendars. Muslim physicians served in Yuan hospitals, and vice versa. Chinese engineers went to Persia to help build siege weapons and improve irrigation. Let's not gloss over that Mongol conquests were brutal initially, but by Marco's time, the generation of Kublai was more about administration and cultural exchange. In that era, other Westerners also came east, like William of Rubruck, a Franciscan friar who visited Möngke Khan's court slightly before Marco and wrote of the cultural diversity he found Nestorian Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims debating religion at the Khan's banquet. The Mongols welcomed such debates. They were curious about everything. Under Pax Mongolica, trade cities like Samarkand regained importance as waypoints since they were rebuilt under Mongol governance and repopulated. Kashgar thrived again. In China, Kublai revived and expanded the Grand Canal to better move goods internally, linking Silk Road goods arriving in the north to the heartland and south. However, nothing is permanent. By the 14th century, Mongol unity cracked, different khanates fought, and the Black Death struck, likely spreading along Mongol trade routes. Marco Polo by that time had returned to Venice and written his accounts in prison around 1299, telling incredulous Europeans of the wonders he saw. Few believed all of it, earning his book the nickname Il Milione, the Million Lies. But later centuries would vindicate much of his story. Now imagine around 1350, a Silk Road caravan, making what is perhaps one of the last grand voyages before upheaval. The Mongol regimes are weakening. Soon the Ming will overthrow the Yuan in China, 1368, and impose stricter controls on foreign trade. The Timurids will rise in Central Asia. Timur's conquests around 1400 ironically disturbed trade again, though he himself was a patron of arts that travelled. Maritime trade is also becoming more prominent with better ships. Within a century or two, Europeans will sail around Africa, reaching India and China by sea, reducing reliance on the overland Silk Road. Bit by bit, the old road will see fewer caravans. But our caravan in 1350 moves steadily, perhaps sensing an era's end but still living its journey. At a fireside, an elderly merchant might tell youngsters, "We live in a fortunate time. I remember my grandfather said how dangerous it was before the Mongols. Now I have seen 50 cities safely." That merchant might also remark on new competition from the Indian Ocean traders and wonder what the future holds. Perhaps they've heard of a new route concept, going by sea directly from China to Persia. In fact, Mongol princesses were escorted by sea on occasion, like Kublai's daughter's ill-fated voyage to Persia that Marco Polo was on, which took 2 years by sea, and only a fraction survived. So not yet an easy route, but improving. When the Ming dynasty regained China, they initially extended the Silk Road again into Central Asia, somewhat, but soon they turned attention to maritime expeditions, like Zheng He's, and fortifying the northern borders. The old trade withered also, due to the rise of Turkic conquerors, like the Ottomans, who by 1453 took Constantinople and cut off some of the flow to Europe. Europeans therefore urgently sought sea routes, leading to Columbus, Da Gama, etc. The Silk Road slowly fell out of regular use, Its cities either turned inward or decayed. By 1500s, one could still travel it, and some did, but it was a shadow of its former glory. Let's close this chapter by standing on the ancient walls of Kashgar at sunset in late 14th century. The glory days of Pax Mongolica are passing. The city is now under a local khanate, and travel is again less safe beyond. We watch a small caravan depart westward through the Kashgar gate. Perhaps it's one of the last headed to Aleppo or Istanbul, laden with raw silk and a few chests of porcelain. The caravan leader is a grey-bearded Uyghur who has made the trip many times under the Mongols, but now goes with some uncertainty, aware that at some point he might have to bribe or evade new warlords. He prays quietly at the gate's shrine for protection. The gate captain, also nostalgic, waves them off politely. As they disappear into the dusk, the captain murmurs a line of poetry he recalls. The road is endless, but tonight we rest under one sky. The Mongol Empire's gift was that for a short while, many rested under one sky indeed, unified, exchanging, at peace. And this allowed that grand cross-continental conversation of the Silk Road to reach a zenith. We, as time travelers of imagination, got to witness that and journey with the likes of Marco Polo through a stable, open Asia, now carrying the gentle wisdom of those golden years. We prepare to say farewell to the Silk Road itself, reflecting on its legacy as it quietly yielded to new chapters of history. Sunset and legacy, the Silk Road's afterglow in the modern world. Our long and gentle journey now brings us to the final chapter of the Silk Road story. As all days must end, so did the Silk Road's era of prominence. In this chapter, we will watch the sunset of the Silk Road, how it declined when new forces arose, and then bask in its enduring legacy that still colors our world today. The tone is peaceful, even a bit nostalgic, as we wrap up our travels and reflect on what remains of those ancient threads across the world. Imagine standing at the port of Calicut, Kozhikode, in India around the year 1500. A strange new ship with billowing sails appears on the horizon. It's Portuguese, carrying Vasco da Gama, arriving by sea from Europe. This moment symbolizes a shift. Europeans had found a way to bypass the overland routes and the intermediary traders by navigating the oceans. The age of discovery had begun. With it, the center of gravity for trade moved to the coasts and high seas. Over the next decades, ships laden with spices, silk, tea, and porcelain would sail around Africa or across the Pacific, reaching Europe directly. The arduous caravan trails lost their former necessity. At the same time, political changes sealed the Silk Road's fate. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople, Istanbul, and effectively cut off many traditional land routes from the eastern Mediterranean to Central Asia. The Ottomans and later Safavid Persians often discouraged independent caravan trade that might benefit their rivals, preferring their own controlled networks. The once cosmopolitan cities, like Baghdad, Damascus, Samarkand, experienced periods of stagnation or conflict under new regimes. China, under the Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644, adopted a more isolationist stance, reviving and extending the Great Wall to keep steppe invaders out rather than sending envoys west. Ming China did engage in maritime trade. The voyages of Admiral Zheng He between 1400 1405 to 1433 were spectacular but short-lived, and they saw less need for trade. Risky overland missions. The Silk Road oases gradually fell out of the limelight. Some were depopulated due to changed river courses or over-farming. Others were ravaged by nomadic invasions like those of the Uzbek tribes, or later, the collapse of the Timurid Empire. By the 17th century, if one undertook the Silk Road journey, one would find it a lonely and perhaps perilous road, nothing like the bustling artery of medieval times. The grand caravanserais might be in disrepair, their courtyards visited more by wind-blown sand than merchants. The once thriving Buddhist monasteries in Central Asia had vanished as Islam became dominant. The libraries of places like Dunhuang were sealed up and forgotten until their rediscovery by archaeologists around 1900. The knowledge exchanges slowed. Europe no longer looked east for science as much. Instead, it found new knowledge via the scientific revolution and the New World. Asia, for its part, became more internally focused, or maritime focused. The Islamic world's trade pivoted to the Indian Ocean too. But even as the Silk Road's literal routes grew quiet, its legacy lived on in various forms. The people who had for centuries been connected didn't just lose that heritage overnight. For one, cross-cultural communities persisted. For instance, in Western China and Central Asia, you find peoples like the Uyghurs, Tajiks, Uzbeks, whose very cultures are a mix of East and West. Their music, dress, and cuisine reflect Silk Road fusion. The Hui people in China, Chinese Muslims, are descendants of Silk Road Muslim traders. They still practice Islam and have mosques that architecturally blend Chinese and Arabic styles, a legacy of those Nestorian and later Islamic influences in Tang and Yuan China. Languages still carried evidence of Silk Road contacts. We have words in English like sugar from Sanskrit via Persian, silk itself from Old English siolok, ultimately from Chinese si, purps, orange, from Sanskrit naranga via Persian and Arabic. Or think of Chinese, which gained words like puta, putao, for grape, from Persian via Silk Road, shizi, shizi, for lion, from Persian shur. The very concept of certain things in each culture existed thanks to Silk Road introduction, such as paper and printing reaching the West, or glasswares and gold coinage reaching China. Then there is the artistic legacy. Renaissance art in Europe, one can argue, was enriched by the influx of techniques and pigments from the East. For example, ultramarine blue paint, made from lapis lazuli, a Silk Road import, adorned the cloak of the Virgin Mary in many paintings. That precious pigment came from Afghan mines. Inversely, the motif of the Western cherub, angel, and grapevines persisted in Chinese decoration on occasion, long after initial introduction. The idea of the dragon and phoenix paired, a symbol beloved in China, also may have Sogdian Persian parallels of paired mythical creatures from Silk Road art. Modern national boundaries overlay the old Silk Road, but interestingly, many modern international projects retrace its path. The Trans-Asian railways planned in the 20th century were essentially steel Silk Roads. Today, China's Belt and Road Initiative explicitly invokes the Silk Road, aiming to build infrastructure linking Eurasia again. The romance of the Silk Road has inspired explorers, writers, and artists in the modern era. People like Ella Mayat, Peter Hopkirk, and others who in the 20th century journeyed by jeep or camel to find remnants of it. Now imagine we stand at Dunhuang once more, but in the present day, it's quiet except for tourists who come to see the Mogao caves. Sand dunes still encroach at the edges. Perhaps we hold a bit of silk scarf bought from a local market. The silk is still made in China, but likely trucked or flown in rather than caravan. As stars appear, one could almost hear faint echoes, Sanskrit chanting from a long-gone monastery, a camel bell's jingle from a departing caravan, laughter from a Sogdian tavern. The spirit of connection lingers in the dust. What is the legacy of the Silk Road? It's the idea that different cultures can interact and enrich each other rather than clash. It's the proof that globalization is not new. People have been connected for millennia. The Silk Road helped shape the world by spreading major religions, Buddhism to East Asia, Islam to Central Asia, Christianity to some parts, by enabling major technological transfers, paper, gunpowder westward, metal casting, glass blowing eastward, and by seeding the global diet. Imagine Italian cuisine without pasta or oranges, or Indian cuisine without chilies, which came later via other routes but concepts similar, or Chinese cuisine without Central Asian grapes and pomegranates. Even biologically, the Silk Road changed demographics. Gene flows occurred as people intermarried. Some Central Asians have European features. Some populations in parts of Europe and Russia have Asian ancestry markers. Silent stories of ancient travelers' encounters. Philosophically, perhaps the legacy is also one of curiosity and openness. The great travelers, like Xuanzang, Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, all wrote that they learned and gained so much wisdom from foreign lands. They fostered a tradition of travel literature that would later inspire others. Columbus carried Marco Polo's book, for example, hoping to reach China by sea. In recent decades, UNESCO declared parts of the Silk Road as World Heritage, and there is renewed interest in it as a symbol of Eurasian collaboration. It inspires cooperative cultural projects between countries that the route passed through, like joint archaeology programs, Silk Road music festivals, where musicians from many countries play together, bridging styles. The Silk Road also left tangible legacies, architectural influences, the spread of certain dome construction techniques east and pagoda designs west, the spread of games, playing cards, chess, polo as mentioned, and even the very concept of international trade agreements might hark back to Mongol-issued trade passports, a medieval precursor of things like visas or WTO accords. In spirit, to end on a gentle note, consider this. Each time you see a piece of silk fabric, think of the many hands that historically carried silk across continents, and the many friendships struck on cold desert nights, protecting that precious cargo. Each time you sip tea, imagine the camel caravans that once brought tea bricks to Central Asia, where nomads welcomed them to brew warming chai under their yurts. The legacy of the Silk Road lives quietly in those everyday pleasures. Our journey along threads across the world is drawing to a close. The sun is setting over the desert one last time. We envision a small caravan camp as in ages past. A fire crackles, the twilight is violet and gold. The travelers, be they Chinese, Persian, Greek, Indian, Turkic, finish their meal, share a few last stories, then retire one by one into their tents. The stars, the same stars we see now, blink to life overhead, forming a glowing band, as though reflecting the very path of the Silk Road itself across the earth. In the silence, Perhaps one lone traveler, wrapped in a cloak, sits a bit longer by the embers and gazes at the sky, filled with wonder and gratitude for the day's discoveries. As we, the listeners of this tale, drift into our own gentle night, we carry that traveler's wonder with us. We have walked the mountains and deserts, visited bustling markets and serene monasteries, met countless friends from different cultures, all in the safe company of this calm historical journey. The Silk Road shows us that even in a world that can feel divided, there have long been roads that connect us, and connections bring understanding, creativity, and peace. With that comforting thought, we say goodbye to the Silk Road. Its physical roads may have faded, but the threads it wove among peoples remain, in our cultures, our languages, our arts, and our hearts. May the memory of those ancient, gentle threads inspire us to weave new bonds of friendship in our own time. Now let your mind settle, as if it too were an old caravan, coming to rest after a long voyage. Feel the serenity of knowing our journey is complete and fruitful. The night is deep and kind. In the distance, you might almost hear that phantom camel bell and the murmur of a lullaby in many tongues blending into one. The Silk Road sleeps now, and so do we, under one sky, dreaming of peace and connectedness forever. Good night, and safe travels in your dreams.